Hi, it's Katrina. Number 10. Serapeum of Alexandria. The Serapeum of Alexandria was built by Ptolemy III, who reigned the Ptolemaic kingdom between 246 and 222 BC. This was during the Ptolemaic era of Egypt, when ancient Egypt was a distant memory, and the Greeks largely controlled the North African nation. It was a time of great architectural and artistic endeavors. And it was during these years that the Lighthouse of Alexandria was built, as well as other extremely impressive wonders of the ancient world. The Serapeum of Alexandria was a temple, one so monumental and impossibly beautiful that it could have rivaled the Temple of Zeus in Athens. It was dedicated to Serapis, a deity that not too many people know about these days. Serapis was a Greek-Egyptian deity that only appeared around the 3rd century BC. Serapis was a way to unify the Egyptian people and the Greek occupiers, who invented their own god to try and make their conquering of Egypt more amicable for everyone. Based on what we know from historical accounts, the Serapeum was the most glorious temple in the Greek part of Alexandria. The temple boasted a great image of Serapis, and it functioned as a library. It was an offshoot of the Library of Alexandria, containing much of the same collection of ancient books. But then the Christian Emperor Constantine put an end to the era of temples in Egypt. The Serapeum and other places like it were closed by the emperor in July of 325 AD. It was such a disaster that shortly after, religious riots broke out and there was rampant destruction in Alexandria. The violence reached its peak in 391 AD, and the Serapeum was destroyed by a mob of angry Christians and Roman soldiers. Number 9. Dunatar Castle. Dunatar Castle might just be the most beautiful castle in all of Scotland. It's a marvelous medieval fortress positioned at the edge of a rocky headland overlooking the vast blue ocean. It's located just 2 miles from the nearest town of Stonehaven. Not much is left of the fairy tale castle these days, but enough is still there that visitors can feel as if they've been transported to the 15th century. It's believed that the castle was fortified early on in the medieval ages, although nobody knows exactly when. The fortress played its biggest role in history during the 18th century, when the Jacobite risings took place. It was here where the Scottish crown jewels were hidden from Oliver Cromwell when he invaded Scotland in the 17th century. Before the great castle stood on the headland, there was nothing but a small chapel. It was founded in the 5th century AD by Saint Ninian. Then, over the following centuries, more fortifications were added until Dunatar became a formidable fortress. The king of Alba was killed here during an attack by the Vikings in 900 AD. And then, in 934 AD, English King Ethelstan raided the castle. It fell into disrepair around 1715. But in the 20th century, the castle was modestly restored, and it was turned into a tourist attraction. Would you like to visit here, or have you already? Let me know in the comments below. Number 8. Varzia Cave Monastery. The Varzia Cave Monastery in Georgia is an underground place of worship, as well as a medieval fortress. What's truly remarkable about the whole compound is that it was built into the side of some cliffs. It's essentially a cave town, once inhabited by frightened Georgians escaping the Mongols. Its underground halls were dug from solid rock, and the monastery looks like something you would expect to read about in a fantasy book. The history behind the monastery is fascinating. The people of Georgia were pushed into a desperate corner in the late 1100s. Their medieval kingdom was being bullied by the Mongol hordes, and they weren't the only ones. The Mongols were causing chaos throughout Europe. In response, the fabled Queen Tamar of the Georgians ordered the construction of an underground sanctuary in 1185. They began by digging deep holes into the side of Erusheli Mountain. It took a lot of work, but the end result was nothing short of miraculous. The underground fortress was dug 13 levels deep. Over 6,000 apartments were hollowed out of the mountain, including a bell tower, a church, and a throne room for the queen. The only access to this place was a single tunnel hidden at the edge of the Mitkvari River. It was a massive underground city that could only be entered by finding the secret passage on the other side of the raging river. Amazingly, the underground city was never bothered by the Mongols. However, there was an earthquake in 1283 that ripped the whole place apart. After that, it was used by a monastery community up until 1551, when it was raided by the Persians. These days, there is still a small group of monks maintaining the ancient sanctuary. Number 7. The Viking Mead Hall. A giant Viking hall, like something straight out of a storybook, was discovered by archaeologists in late 2022. It happened during construction work on some housing units near the village of Hune in Denmark. Archaeologists were shocked to reveal a huge hall from the days of Harald Bluetooth, the legendary king of Denmark and Norway. Harald ruled between 958 and 986 AD, and he may have even visited this hall to share mead with his loyal nobles. Unfortunately, not a thing remains of the hall today except its buried foundations. There's no walls left standing, and so far, no artifacts have been discovered either. But archaeologists did reveal the underlayer where the floor of the hall had once been. You really have to use your imagination when picturing what this thing looked like in the 10th century. It measured about 131 feet long, and it was roughly 30 feet wide. Back when it was still standing, the hall had most certainly been used as a gathering place for the Vikings. Political entities from various areas may have met here to eat and drink. It's also possible that they gathered here to discuss plans for pillaging European coastlines. Just a short distance from the Viking Hall, archaeologists uncovered a rune stone. The stone is inscribed with 2 Viking names, and it's been dated to 970 AD. Archaeologists say they have excavated part of the hall and are hoping to find more buildings and features still hidden underground. However, if there are more structures, and this really was a Viking village, those discoveries won't be made until later in 2023. Number 6. The Lor Lindu Megaliths. In the Bada Valley on the island of Sulawesi, Indonesia, there are some extremely peculiar monuments. Multiple carved stone statues can be found across the island, called the Lor Lindu Megaliths. These statues are larger than life, traces of a long-lost civilization. Some of the megaliths are positively huge and appear to depict humanoid beings. They look like mysterious statues straight out of a storybook, megaliths a hero might come across in a forgotten land of ruins and myth. The megalithic statues were likely made by a group of people known as the Bugis. They migrated to the island of Sulawesi around 2000 BC. Almost nothing is known about these people, and very little archaeological research has been done so far. The island is home to a lush tropical forest, and most of the Bugis culture's ruins have either been destroyed or reclaimed by nature. So many of their statues remain simply because of their massive size, and the fact that they were built in vast plains where they couldn't be lost so easily. There are about 400 of them in total, spread throughout the Bada Valley. Some of the megaliths were made to look like animals, while others are just giant urns. There are also a few statues that were made in human forms. The ones made to look like people have oversized heads, round eyes, and they kind of look like they could have been modeled after extraterrestrials. The purpose of these things is a total mystery. Some expert historians believe they could have been built to represent honored members of the tribe, while some say they were modeled after gods. Do you think it's possible that the megaliths on the island of Sulawesi could have been built by an ancient race of giants? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below, and while you're at it, be sure to subscribe. Number 5. Bailo Claudia. The Roman ruins of Bailo Claudia in Spain can be found on the Costa de la Luz, not far from the quaint beach town of Bologna. 2,000 years ago, a city stood here where you can now find nothing but ruins and expensive beach resorts. The town was positioned on a strategic trading route between Europe and North Africa. Anyone traveling between the 2 continents had to use this route, and so the town flourished. In its heyday around the 2nd century BC, this city would have been truly marvelous. Its temples, central forum, aqueducts, baths, and fish salting factories would have made it look like a thriving Roman town straight out of a historical reenactment. The history of Bailo Claudia goes back to the Roman Republic in the 2nd century BC. However, it wasn't until around 54 AD, under the rule of Claudius, that the city acquired the Roman status of municipium. Around the same time, the town also attained a major economic splendor. But like many fabulous fairy tale towns in ancient Rome, the economic prosperity was brief. In the 3rd century AD, Roman power in Spain began to die. There were also earthquakes, but the city survived up until the 7th century AD, when much of the town was destroyed by war. Bailo Claudia is now just a shadow of it once was, and the only things that remain in the city are sand dunes, pillars, and a single white marble statue of a long-dead Roman. Number 4. Dunscaith Castle. One of the most mystical places in Scotland is the Isle of Skye. It's a fascinating place dotted with castles in an area that's sparsely populated due to the region's unbearable cold and windy winters. One of the more fairy tale places on the island is Dunscaith Castle. It's also called the Fortress of Shadows because local legend says that a warrior maiden once called this place home. The castle sits on an offshore rock that rises 40 feet above sea level. Between the rock and the mainland is a massive gap of 20 feet, which was once crossable by a walled bridge. The bridge collapsed a long time ago, and since then, the castle has slowly fallen into ruin. Only small parts of it are still there, with about 5 feet of its walls still remaining. Historians tell us the castle originally belonged to Clan MacDonald in the 14th century, but it's not exactly clear when it was built. In the 15th century, the castle was taken over by King James IV of Scotland, who defeated Clan MacDonald's chief, the Lord of the Isles at the time. But the castle proved to be useless, and it was later abandoned in the early 17th century. As for the warrior maiden, we don't even know if she really existed. According to Irish mythology, she was a legendary martial arts teacher who at some point lived in the castle. Number 3. The Convent of Christ. The Convent of Christ in Tomar is a 12th century Templar stronghold constructed in Portugal. When the Order of the Knights Templar was dissolved by the malicious King Philip IV of France in the 14th century, the Portuguese branch of the order changed their name. They instead became known as the Knights of the Order of Christ in order to avoid persecution. But let's start at the beginning. It was the Templar Knights in 1118 who founded the convent, and its construction continued for over 100 years. You might think of it as the Portuguese equivalent of the Cathedral of Notre Dame in Paris, only maybe even grander. The Convent of Christ was built to be a mighty medieval castle, and it quickly became one of the most important pieces of defense against the Moors who were trying to invade Portugal. The Templars used it as their seat of power up until they were betrayed and hunted down like dogs. Pope John XII then established the Order of Christ, and the military castle was converted into a place of religious importance. In fact, when it was first built in the 12th century, the Templars modeled the convent after the Dome of the Rock in Jerusalem. They believed the Dome of the Rock was a remnant of the fabled Temple of Solomon. Number 2. Alcatar of Segovia. The Alcatar of Segovia is a truly fairy tale-like medieval fortress in Spain. It's the ideal vision of a castle from a storybook, complete with tall turrets, spiral staircases, cliffside ramparts, and a huge central tower. Its interior is furnished in all the dressings of a typical medieval palace. It has gold-flaked ceilings, creepy portraits of long-forgotten nobles, centuries-old tapestries, and even a throne room. The Hall of the Galley is complete with the mural of the coronation of Isabella I of Castile, while the royal chamber still contains a bed fit for a king. There is even an armory room where you can find suits of armor and ancient weapons. The site of the castle has been occupied since at least Roman times, when a small wooden fort was built. But it was in the 12th century that Alcázar of Segovia was transformed from an Arab military stronghold into a Gothic castle occupied by the Christians. Weirdly enough, it wound up being used as a state prison for nearly 200 years. Then, King Charles III turned it into the Royal Artillery School in 1762. The fairy tale castle functioned as a training barracks for soldiers until 1862, when it was badly damaged in a fire. The Ministry of War took possession of it in 1896, and today it is a museum and military archive. Number 1. Nimrods Fortress. The Nimrod Fortress in Israel is by far the largest castle from the Crusader era. It was built as a mountain stronghold in the 13th century, high above the Golan Heights with beautiful views of the surrounding region. It's also right beside the only mountain peak in Israel topped with snow, on a slope of Mount Hermon. Beneath the mighty fortress are the splendid Banias forests and their flowing rivers and frothing waterfalls. The fortress may be in ruins today, with very little left of its once mighty walls and towers, but the beauty of the natural surroundings is still enough to take a visitor's breath away. The fortress was a crucial place in the region, controlling the road leading from Tyre in ancient Lebanon to the Mediterranean coastline. It was named after Nimrod, a great warrior from biblical times. However, it wasn't the Crusaders who controlled the castle, but rather their enemies. It was built by the Ayyubid dynasty and was controlled at the time by Al-Aziz Uthman, the second Ayyubid sultan in Egypt. Then, later, the fortress was improved upon by the Mamluk Empire of ancient Egypt. Thanks for watching! Which of these amazing ancient places would you like to visit? Let us know in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe and come back soon. See you later. Bye!